something we need now more than ever. See, Ray, my I don't know what are you, my father-in-law.
No, come on. You're my son's brother-in-law.
I'm his son's brother-in-law, so I don't know if that makes my uncle-in-law or something, but anyway, nice
My
to see
son's
you.
married to your sister.
Yes,
Let's leave it
that part I can keep straight. But no, it's really great to be here and to see people so energized about this election cycle. I'm actually going to have a seat if you guys don't mind. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself, why I'm running for Secretary of State, but I'd like to save most of our time for questions, because I find that there's a lot of misinformation out there about what the Secretary of State does and really what that office can be doing and the potential for change there. To take it from the beginning, my name is Josh Zakim. I'm currently a Boston City Councilor. I chair our Civil Rights Committee. I've chaired the Civil Rights Committee all of my 3 terms on the City Council. Before that, well, I still am an attorney. I started my career at Greater Boston Legal Services, working with families that were facing foreclosure and eviction. In 2010, the height of the subprime foreclosure crisis, we found success by working with people at all levels of government. It really taught me how important a force for good government can be when we're all working together towards a common goal. We worked with the federal government, with President Obama's Treasury Department, with Governor Patrick's administration here in Massachusetts, and with many local city and town governments. And that approach and that experience has really shaped how I look at public service ever since then, both through my work on the Boston City Council and now in this race for Secretary of State. On the City Council, I've really had a lot of joy and pride in chairing our Civil Rights Committee and legislating on important issues for the people of Boston and Massachusetts. One of our proudest moments is I wrote the Boston Trust Act, which is the legislation that the president would say makes us an outlaw, a sanctuary city. I'm very proud of that. It's something that we've had on the books in Boston since 2014, and it's worked incredibly well. And our police department is happy with how it's worked out, and our neighbors are happy with how it's worked out, and our communities are safer because of it. And that work, the City Council, looking at immigration issues, looking at equity in housing, and government contracting, is all incredibly important. But what brings me here before you today is voting rights and voting access, and making sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard on election day. You know, people who came to us in the City Council and they said, you know, you're doing all this great stuff. We're leading the way with the Trust Act, with civil rights legislation. Massachusetts has been a leader in things like marriage equality and healthcare reform and so many important progressive issues of our time, but we're behind on voting rights. North Carolina is ahead of us on issues like same-day voter registration. We need to change. So we had some hearings in the City Council. I heard from folks, activists. I heard from elections department people. I heard from our school department. And I think most importantly, I heard from a high school student, a Boston Public School student. He's 18, registered to vote. He says, you know what, I can't vote on Tuesdays. I'm in school. I have to be there in the morning before the polls are opening. I have to start on my commute to school. And I've got a job, and my friends have extracurricular activities afterwards, and we can't get back to our polling place. And being in school is not an excuse under current law to vote absentee. Neither is being at work. And you know, for many people, maybe that's not such a big deal. But if you're punching a time clock and you're being paid by the hour, or you've got to worry about childcare or care for your parents or grandkids, you know, getting a couple hours during the day is not as easy as it first sounds. And we need to do more on that. We have the technology, we have the ability to do this. You know, some of these rules other states do it. There are 14 states in the District of Columbia have same-day registration, but making it easy absentee voting. Oregon does all voting by mail. California has permanent absentee voting. Other states, in states that you would not think of as progressive bastions, are doing this sort of thing, and Massachusetts hasn't. So that's why I got into this race, because it's time for a change. We have the technology. It's not sophisticated at all. We have the resources. This is not very expensive to do. And there's just a satisfaction, a complacency. People will be okay with the status quo. And Bob was just talking about the Charlie Baker's margin of victory last time around. It was under 50,000 votes. And we have nearly 700,000 eligible voters in Massachusetts who are not registered right now. Now, that's terrible to me. And the job of Secretary of State as Chief Elections Officer is to get those people registered in a nonpartisan fashion, but making sure that we're providing an opportunity. Listen, I'm a Democrat, I'm a proud progressive Democrat, but I think every individual, regardless of their views, needs to have the opportunity to register, to vote, and to participate. And we are not even being trailblazers. I'm not talking about trying new things in Massachusetts. I'm talking about things that have been going on in some states for decades. New Hampshire and Maine are our closest neighbors that have same-day registration. Automatic registration in Oregon added nearly 250,000 people to the voting rolls. Same-day registration usually boosts turnout between 5 and 10%. I mean, these are significant numbers, and these are all people who are eligible voters and are just not participating. So we need to do that, and we need to have a more proactive leader in the Secretary of State's office. I look and see what our Attorney General, Maura Healey, has done with that office and taken stands on important issues and led, as opposed to just administering an office, just making sure things are working okay. We need to be embracing new ideas. We need to embrace technology to reach out to people. Secretary of State's office is also the chief securities regulator for the Commonwealth, equivalent to the SEC at the federal level. And that's something that, very few people know about. I think that's a failure of communication. We need to get that information to people who have been taken advantage of by stockbrokers and stock scams and get redress and get their money back. People don't know about that. Secretary of State, I will not be sitting in an office in Beacon Hill. I'm going to be out in rooms like this, in community centers and senior centers across the state, talking to people about the resources they have available to them, making it easier to participate. And it's not just around registration, it's around holding powerful interests accountable to the securities enforcement ability, through the lobbying regulation. The Secretary is the chief regulator of lobbyists in Massachusetts. We talk about outside interests or corporate interests having an outsized role in our politics, and some of that stuff we can't stop. We have the U.S. Supreme Court to thank for a lot of those problems. But what we can do is hold people accountable and make sure there's transparency in Massachusetts. Secretary of State's the supervisor of public records in Massachusetts. That means when you've asked your local police department or your local town council or school committee for communications they've had about policy decisions, and they say no, which in Massachusetts they often do say no, you're supposed to be able to go to the Secretary of State's office and have them order that information turned over. Far too often, that has not been happening. We have some structural changes we need to make to Massachusetts public records laws, but one thing that needs to be done is have a supervisor of public records who is going to use that administrative authority to come down on the side of transparency, to let Governor Baker try and defend in court his decision not to release records that the public is entitled to. There's a lot there, and a lot of this campaign has been about educating people about what the Secretary of State's office could be doing, how it can be a platform for progressive change. It's not, I don't think it's especially progressive, although apparently it is these days, to want to get eligible people to the polls. I mean, that has somehow turned into a partisan issue. And it's outrageous, and with people voting rights under attack across the country, Massachusetts needs to lead. We cannot be in the middle of the pack. Listen, we are not in a place where people are, changing polling locations at the last minute and doing that active suppression. But that's not enough. This is the state that brought marriage equality to the United States of America. This is the state that led in the abolition movement. This is the state that needs to be leading on these issues, and we should. Not only because it makes things better for people in the Commonwealth, but because people need to be looking to us across this country. I am embarrassed when people talk about North Carolina having same-day registration long before Massachusetts. We need to get there, and that's what I'm going to do with the Secretary of State. I will make sure to look at innovative ideas on any front that falls into the Secretary's purview. We need to make changes. We need to bring people into this process instead of closing them out. So I'd love to take questions. I know this, again, it's a lot of information. We also have some literature going around that has my cell phone and email on it, which I'm always happy. Prefer email because I'm often in settings like this and it's hard to talk on the phone, but anything is welcome to continue the conversation. So thank you.
Just to remind everybody, there's a clipboard over here, one clipboard, it's next to Bob Massey's stuff. It's for Josh Zakim. There's a whole bunch of sheets of paper. The one on the top says Acton, but just add your town on the bottom or ask me and I will do it. Because we need to get Josh on the ballot, and he's a statewide candidate, just like Bob Massey, so he needs 10,000.
We need 5, but
Oh, you only need 5, okay.
the current Secretary of State's the certifying authority for the signatures, so we're trying to get 20. We're gonna make sure we pad those numbers, so if you get a chance,
And
please.
then also, if you want to support Josh, if you could go to your caucus, the Acton just had theirs, but there's people from many towns here, run as a delegate so you can support Josh. He needs to get 15% of the people behind him in June 2nd at the caucus.
And we're running against a 25-year incumbent.
Who's in charge of elections.
Right. So, and he's not had a significant, I mean, he last had a primary challenge 12 years ago. This is, it's long overdue. No, I know it's.
And Josh is a very substantial candidate. I mean, you know, sometimes these people are running, I think you have 10 times the amount of money of some of the people running for governor, so. I mean, he's a very real candidate here. He has a real good chance, so let's try to support him if we can.
So this, I hope is a fair question to ask, but how did we get here? I mean, this is Massachusetts. I'm 26, so I grew up thinking that we were, you know, very far from the blue column, and it's every day I'm learning more and I'm just like, we're way more red than I thought we were. And like you highlighted, that this is a partisan issue is ridiculous. It's a democracy. Just open it up to people and let them make the decisions. So that's my question. How did we get here?
I'll try to be brief on that one. Listen, I think part of the problem is a sense of, you know, achievement, complacency, resting on our laurels. On a lot of the substantive issues, I think Massachusetts has been a leader. You know, I talk about, you know, marriage equality, we talk about the millionaire's tax that I think if it gets on the ballot, despite all the efforts, it's probably gonna pass here and we're gonna do very well. But the processes, how we talk about these things and how we challenge legislators. You know, our state, and I think we have many fine elected legislators, not all of them, but the challenge rate for incumbents is almost non-existent in Massachusetts. And when they are challenged, they almost, was in the high 90s or something, the re-election rate. And maybe that means they're doing a great job, but what I think it means is a lot of people are discouraged. Turnout is low. In non-presidential years, primary turnout in Massachusetts has gone down 30% in the last 20 years. And that's as our population grows. And that's because people are not registering, and you know, everyone has some individual responsibility to do this, but you know, when people have more very pressing needs in their lives, again, whether it's childcare, whether it's work, whether it's health issues, you know, registering 20 days before an election, especially when you think about a primary. This year it's the day after Labor Day, which my opponent kindly set that date. For the first time in 125 years, we're having a primary the day after Labor Day. People are coming back from things. Very few people are paying attention, through no fault of their own, I think, to what's going on, and there's no reason not to have same-day registration. There's actually been some studies that show it reduces costs. My opponent's been saying it is too expensive to implement, too many resources, but I just read a study that was from Iowa and North Carolina that said it reduced or kept their costs the same. So we need to do it, and we need advocates. This is not a job about administering the rules, if that's a big part of it, but you need someone who's going to be willing to try new things a year or two after you were born. And that leads to, I think, some need for changes, modernization.
Yep.
Yes.
So I worked on a ballot initiative collecting signatures this fall, and I also had the task of going to many local town halls to deliver these petitions. And these town clerks were so overworked with all these petitions because a lot of people were afraid that if there was an extra mark, that the whole petition would get disqualified, so they would do one signature per petition, etc. And they were just totally frazzled. But they were all really good about returning the petitions really quickly in spite of it. So what would you do to modernize that process and make it, less of a burden on our town clerks?
Well, I think one of the jobs of the Secretary of State is to be advocating for the resources necessary for this. You know, we've seen some studies from other states that ballot initiatives aside, same-day registration, automatic registration. Automatic registration actually would relieve the burden, because what automatic voter registration, for people who don't know, is when you get your driver's license, now you're offered the opportunity to register if you'd like. Automatic reverses that. It would say you are registered, and then offer the opportunity to not register if you don't want to. And then it actually will update the voter file as well. So town clerks are going to sort of have that part of it relieved a little bit. And when you move, it automatically updates it. I think most people tend to update their driver's license or their health insurance if they use Mass Health or other state information quicker than they do voting. So that would relieve some of the burden, but we need to get the resources for them. If they need extra workers around election time or certifying signatures, we should be sending people from the Secretary of State's office. There are thousands of employees under the Secretary of State's office that can be helpful in this. And another answer I would say might be a little flip, but that's not a daily occurrence. I think we all have crunch time at work sometimes, and I want to make sure we have the resources for our city and town clerks, especially in smaller communities where they really need it. I think there's an ability though to get people from the state administration out there to help us out with that.
I was gonna ask about the census.
Sure.
I know the census is coming up, and there's a lot of concern
Yeah.
about what is gonna be on the census, additional questions, and making sure that people are comfortable filling out the census, because obviously it's so critical for representation and also for federal funding. So, I'd just like to hear a little bit
Sure.
from you about that, because that is coming up.
Yeah, no, we're gonna have a census in 2020, and I think the president has made it clear, and his administration has made it clear that they're gonna do whatever they can to undercount populations in Massachusetts, to undercount people in, certainly in our immigrant communities, and communities of color, places that they don't like, and that's been made clear through their statements, through their appointments, through the work they're doing at the Commerce Department to set that up. And the Secretary of State is the point person in Massachusetts for the census, and we need to make sure that we are standing up to those kind of tactics. That we're gonna work with our Attorney General. I have no doubt that our Attorney General will be one of the first ones to take him to court if that happens. But also during that process is really important in making people feel comfortable, whether immigrants, documented or not, often are undercounted in the census process. And we need to make sure that we are having culturally competent census training and census gathering. I mean, that's some of the work I've done on the City Council around the Trust Act, working with government agencies to make folks, undocumented people in that case, feel more comfortable interacting with authority. We need to make sure we're having it in different languages. You know, I certainly would not fight printing them in multiple languages, training translators, you know, that's something I think I would differ on.
Can we do that on our own at the state level, or is it all set at
So
federal
the
level?
questionnaire itself, the text of it, or the content of it is gonna be set. Again, I assume we'll be in litigation about this, given how this presidential administration operates. But translating and training workers and making sure that our state aspect of it is done culturally competently, that makes sense, yeah, is paramount. You know, we are gonna, like you said, federal funding is hugely dependent on our census numbers. Our congressional representation, I think the Republican Party would like nothing more than to take a congressional seat away from a place like Massachusetts or New York or California. So we need to absolutely be vigilant on that. You know, I will be, I don't know, stupidly optimistic to say that maybe something will change in the next year or so and we will not be faced with that. But we have a hostile federal government right now. A federal government that is hostile to the values we hold dear and is being actively hostile. Their infrastructure plan that was just announced clearly is not intended to help communities across Massachusetts, places like us with the funding. They don't want to do it, and we need to stand up for that, and we need to make sure that we're not cooperating with their efforts. There's something called the Interstate Cross-Check System, which, I don't know if you guys know who Chris Kobach is. He was the Kansas Secretary of State. He's the president's sort of voting guru, and he had the Interstate Cross-Check System that Massachusetts was part of until last year. And that turned over our voter file, along with several other dozen states participated in this, and it led to one report by Rolling Stone, which was an incomplete tally, 1 million people being purged off the voting rolls before election time. And that's something we need to be vigilant about. We need to make sure we're protecting our residents and we're not turning records like that over to people who are going to misuse them.
So my question kind of piggybacks that the concern around infiltration of foreign agents or nefarious agencies around voter integrity and security. And so I wondered if you could speak a little bit more to the security piece of it.
Oh, that's really important, and I think that's one of the things about being innovative and trying new things and being willing to talk to the great community of programmers. Massachusetts has actually become a cybersecurity hub with businesses locating here and relocating here and growing here, and we need to make sure we're engaging them. I'll tell you, I represent some of the neighborhoods in Boston where some of these companies are located. In my role as city councilor, they've come to me and said, hey, we want to be good citizens. And that doesn't just mean sending our whole office to paint a playground, although they do that. They want to participate in this and making sure that we're doing that. I've talked to cybersecurity experts and they all have the same response. They think our actual polling locations are secure. You know, it's decentralized, there's no internet hookup to those machines, but the central voter file needs to be secured, and we need to make sure of it. The Obama administration took a look, their Department of Homeland Security, on attempts by hackers to get into voting records. I think they found about 24 attempts They have not released what came of that. I think we need to find out a little bit more. But one, we need to make sure we have paper backups. Two, I think automatic voter registration actually would help. It doesn't solve the problem altogether, but it removes a lot of duplicates. And we just need to say, listen, this is a constant battle. It's an arms race, and you need someone who, one, has those contacts, I think, in the cybersecurity community, the tech community, but also has some knowledge of that. I'm by no means a programmer or a security expert, but being available, online, using those new tools, I think is really important, and we need to reach out to that tech community that's here. I mean, this is an advantage that Massachusetts has, like no other place, maybe California. And these are folks who want to participate and who I think we need to get their ideas and have them on a panel and make sure we're talking about. That's something I'm gonna do during this campaign, but certainly if elected, we need to get them in the room.
Thank you.
So as the person who would be in charge of it if this transition were to happen, what do you think about the idea of transitioning from our current voting system to ranked choice voting?
Yeah, good question. I think ranked choice voting is a great idea. Are people here familiar with ranked? Okay, so save me that. I think it's great. I think one of the things that I think turns people off from participating and leads to our low turnout is that so many times you see someone win a primary with 25% of the vote. It's probably going to happen in the 3rd congressional, and that's no knock on the candidates. But when you're talking about democracy and representation, having someone who is your elected official who came in with 25% of the vote, that means a lot of people didn't vote for them. And I think ranked choice can go a long way towards, one, probably electing candidates that are more in line ideologically with where most of the population is and reducing some of that divisiveness, but also just restores confidence in the fact that, at some level there was a consensus, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I think it makes sense. I think in the range of priorities, what I want to see in electoral reform, same-day registration, automatic voter registration, and making it easier to vote by mail are certainly my top 3. I think ranked choice can go a long way towards helping restore confidence and engagement.
So, I don't know if you have any input into this, but I'm always hearing people complain about local town meeting, which I love, but it's 4 nights long, and, and it's great to hear the guy who wants to speak on every question, but do you have any ideas for how we could make that, like, maybe more online, or more, like, use technology to get more people to be able to vote at town meeting?
So that's tough because by our state constitution, I mean, that power is really, there's some basic rules around openness, transparency, posting of the rules that the Attorney General, and in some cases the Secretary of State, have a role in enforcing. But the actual administration, it's really up to the individual communities. In Boston, our last term as city council, for the first time, we allowed people to testify remotely in our hearings. Like, they could hook up, there's a Google Hangout that we used, and that worked, but that needs to be the rules of the individual body. But absolutely, I think the role for the Secretary of State, which has a pretty large budget, including a lot for communications and public relations, I would redirect some of that to, going back to the same point about city and town clerks, getting those resources into the communities and say, let's have, for lack of a better word, a capital plan for how we're going to modernize some of these systems, both getting public records online, so it's fast, cheap, easy to search, but getting some of that technology. We're not talking big bucks here, but there needs to be a commitment and a plan on that, and I think openness and transparency leads to better government. Never mind being the right thing to do. I think we get better outcomes.
Hey,
Was that a question? Or
Yes,
you want me to-
sorry.
Just want to come back to the ranked choice voting. What do you see as the objections that people have, and how would you address those?
I think probably the objection is it's just not the way we do things. In all honesty, I don't know what another objection was. It seems to work.
People have said it's too complicated for the people to understand.
Well, listen.
Using it in Cambridge.
Right,
and
Cambridge has it, but that doesn't usually play well when you say I'm so, listen,
Maine has it.
and it's under attack in Maine. The legislature is trying to reverse it. Listen, I think the only argument really is what you said. It's confusion and it's inertia, that we've always done it this way. We can educate people. Something I didn't mention is Secretary of State, a civics education is gonna be really important. We have a US history requirement in Massachusetts, which is actually great that we have that, but it's not really civics education. And I think having it, not necessarily even in the schools, but having a program like the Treasurer has done around financial literacy, and using some of the resources of the Secretary of State's office to do that, that can be part of it. I don't know if some of you have seen my opponent's television ads, the publicly funded ones that he puts out, sometimes around election time, just saying, hi, I'm, Secretary of State, don't forget to vote.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money, it's millions of dollars, and we can redirect that into other educational avenues. We need to do it, but if we're gonna do ranked choice voting, I don't think it's gonna happen overnight, so people will have the opportunity to learn about it, and I don't want to, despite who our current president is, I don't want to underestimate people's, intelligence and ability to grasp things. This is not rocket science. We should be able to do it. So, I think it's a question of political will. Like so many of the things I'm talking about right now, if we have an advocate for that in the Secretary of State's office, if we have people like you who are going to be pushing your other elected representatives on this, I think we have a real opportunity to do it. And I know my time's a little up too, so thank you.